It's a 4-month countdown now to December 7, and we're going to be analyzing a few issues as we build up to the 7th of December elections. One of the key things we need to begin to do is to look at some of the big themes that should, in effect, run and dominate the campaign for this year. One of the key issues revolves around the illegal mining menace, Galamsey. As you would notice, over the several elections, counting at least from 2016, 2020, and now 2024, it has been a deciding factor in the outcomes we've seen in key Galamsey illegal mining areas, constituencies across the country. And it's affected both the NDC and the MPP. And so it has now become a very important campaign tool for the parties who are all courting illegal miners in their numbers in these constituencies. It has implications for the fight against illegal mining, but also has implications for policy effectiveness when it comes to the two main political parties. Tonight, we are going to strip it off and look at what it means for this year's election campaign season, bringing back that topic onto the campaign agenda this year, because this is critical. One time we have this president say that he will put his own political career, his own political history on the line in a fight against illegal mining. He didn't quite succeed in doing so. We have another elections. We're yet to hear a real bold commitment from any of the two front runners, John Mahama or Bawumia himself, on what really they want to do radically to end illegal mining. Tonight, we're going to be looking at that particular issue here on PMX. We'll put it in the proper context, tracking back to 2016, just so we understand why it has become such a hot political potato for both parties and why we aren't seeing as much huge interest in this matter on the campaign. I want to bring it back onto the subject of the campaign trail. Stay with me here on PMS. So when I return, my guests will be seated for a conversation on this very important subject. I know PMS is always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough, and as you know, it is one of the key issues that every election year since at least 2016 we've seen emerge quite strongly. Not so this year. So let's have a conversation about how to bring it back onto the campaign agenda. I'm talking about the illegal mining problem. Now, why are we bringing this up now? We're bringing it up now because of what we saw happen in Amanfi East, to be very specific. In the last few weeks, the parliamentary candidate there has been arrested and bailed, and he is the parliamentary candidate for the MPP, and he was campaigning, talking to small-scale miners in the presence of the regional minister, and made a comment inciting the small-scale miners to attack military personnel, police, security personnel generally, if they interfere in their small-scale activities. That, of course, generated an uproar. We heard from the Ghana Armed Forces themselves condemning it. But if you put it in the context of our recent electoral history, you understand why he will be making those comments, because there are votes at stake. Depending on what you say, if you are campaigning in a constituency dominated by small-scale miners. But let's focus for a second on the subject of illegal miners. Now, I want to go back to 2016. Something very interesting happened that year. You remember in 2013, John Mahama was vigorously fighting illegal mining. He had set up a committee at the time to deal with this particular challenge, and he was doing this very vigorous. I remember the time when he set it up in 2013, it was chaired by the then Lands and Natural Resources Minister, Yusuf Husseini. And so in the lead up to the 2016 elections, it became a significant campaign topic. But then opposition candidate, Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, had a different message tailored for the illegal miners. He, at the time, was campaigning and making the promise that he will regularize Galamsey activities if he's elected president, right? And so the Galamsey politics, really, the tone was set. Whereas John Mahama was fighting this vigorously, he had set up his task force to deal with the matter. You had the opposition candidate then talking about regularizing it in 2016, right? So, and these are the facts as it relates to what John Mahama was doing at the time between 2013 and 2016, vigorously fighting this. You saw the task force that was formed, led by Yusuf Husseini at the time. He didn't only stop there. He didn't do that alone. He also went ahead and amended the mineral law, prescribing tougher sanctions for those involved in illegal mining, including seizing the equipment, but also prosecution. So he did quite a bit on that particular front at the time. So what really happened then when we went to the elections? Because it had an impact, right? We saw that the MPP in the elections of 2016 gained in almost all the areas where we had illegal miners dominating when it comes to the constituencies. And we tracked the numbers. He had plus 7.14% more votes in these areas. And they won in these areas that in some of the areas they already were strong, but they increased their votes significantly, right? The NDC, yes, did a bit also there, but eventually lost in many of these constituencies that we tracked. So there are consequences if indeed your message is bought by those in these particular constituencies. That, for me, is an important point to observe. But I also want to go to 2020. The roles were reversed in 2020, were they not, in the lead up to the 2020 elections. Because in 2017, when the Nana Addo, then opposition leader, became president, he sort of flipped the script. And then he then says he's going to put his presidency on the line and fight corruption. He then set up a task force, very similar to John Mahama's, but here's what's called the Interministerial Task Force against illegal mining. And at that time, there was a media coalition that backed him then. So he also started by fighting, using the same techniques, seizing equipment, burning them, etc. People were thrown into jail. Those that they can prosecute were thrown into jail. Now, the interesting thing, though, at the time, when Nana Addo was doing this at the time, we had John Mahama again campaigning in the lead up to the 2020 elections. And he had a similar tone to Nana Addo in 2016. He was making the point that he will introduce an amnesty for illegal miners who have been jailed and that between 2017 to 2020 in the Galamsey focused area. So you see how the script was flipped there in 2020. It had an impact in the elections when it went in there in 2020 polls. And this was an interesting bit there. The MPP, having gained more than 7 percentage points from the 2012 to 2016 elections, now loses out in almost all the Galamsey-focused areas, losing out by more than 10% in the key Galamsey areas in the Western, in the Ashanti, and the Central regions. The NDC gained almost 10 percentage points more in these areas too. So it has a political consequence, right? And no wonder we've seen this playing out again this year. And we see the messages that both sides are now pushing out. John Mahama again this year is talking about deploying artificial intelligence to fight illegal mining. We've seen the vice president also putting in place his own measures. Small-scale miners, he says, introduce a mineral development bank, again targeted at the small-scale miners. He's talking about he would not seize excavators anymore because he's learned from the history I just talked about already, and he's also pitching. We have John Mahama. If you look at him, he presented a very detailed paper on this very recently, where he laid out more than just putting out artificial intelligence to fight this, but he also talking about, more substantively, sacking any member of his government who is found involved in illegal mining. So the messaging has been very clear this year. The reason why this is important is a history. You need to understand that, because if you don't pitch properly, it may cost you votes in the areas. And that is why for us this conversation is important. And so, again, the electoral story in Ashanti, Western, and in the central regions tell themselves, right? But if you look at the trend in some of the areas, for example, let's look at the Upper Daintra West constituency, an area we know has a lot of small-scale miners, illegal miners who are there. Look at 2016 and 2020. Just look at the trend for a second here. Just go back to the history I was talking about. Before 2016, the MPP took advantage, right? 2012, they were just at 52%. Then, as I said, Nana Addo was campaigning that, saying that he's going to regularize it when Jawan was fighting it. In the elections, they climbed to 61%. NDC dropped in that constituency. But look at what happened in 2020. This is a very interesting story indeed. In 2020, when Nana Addo then had reversed the roles, was fighting Galamsey and seizing excavators, etc. And there's a story I found very interesting. The Galamseyers were accusing him of betraying them because he campaigned and told them all manner of stories. And he came and he's fighting them. John Mahama says, well, I'll give you amnesty. What happened in Upper Daintra West? The NDC flipped it in 2020. They won it. They won it there from a defeat of 38%. Now they won it with 50.72%. That is just pure facts for you. And Galamsey politics is one factor we need to pay attention to because it influences the parties and what they're saying. And our effectiveness in dealing with the problem of Galamsey. You need to understand this, understand why it's been very difficult for both parties to have any measure of success. Same story we've seen in Nkranza North constituency. Again, interestingly, if you come to 2012, NPP just had 50% there. They won it, true. But in 2016, on the back of all the promises Nana-Addo was making to the illegal miners and small-scale miners about regularizing it, they climbed to 54%. NDC dropped votes there. Jomam was fighting it. In 2020, what happens? NDC wins that constituency. The constituency they lost in 2016. Again, the messaging is important. Wins it significantly, 57%. And the NPP that had won there the year before the previous elections lost it. This is just a snapshot of the argument and the real issues at stake this year as far as this matter is concerned. My guests are joining me for a conversation. I have with me Ba Mukhtari. He's a spokesperson for John Mahama. She's with me in the studio. I mean, you look at the numbers that I've been pouring over. It's fascinating, really. It's fascinating. It has political, electoral implications, does it not? From the NDC's point of view, how do you view it? And how is that influencing what you say when you get into the constituencies where illegal mining and small-scale miners are predominantly in there and working?
Well, good evening, and thank you very much. I believe that you have literally summed it up, that certainly the NDC has no reason to decline an invitation to, at least advance an argument about why we believe very strongly that our leader has actually exhibited over the years that Galamsey, which is a local word for illegal small-scale miners, has actually become a menace of sorts in terms of the social canker, in terms of the challenges to do with the environment. Today, I read a very interesting article because I knew I was coming here, for example, and it states very categorically that about 2% of lands that were hitherto cocoa farms or farmlands have now actually fallen prey to these activities. Indeed, there is also the situation where cocoa farmers, now completely disgruntled by the ineffective way in which government handles matters to do with cocoa, literally are giving out their lands to what? Small-scale miners in return for at least between $500 and $1,000, monies that they would otherwise not gain from government. We also do know about Cocoa Board and the inherent challenges to do with the resources, to do with resource allocation, to do with funding that nobody knows what has happened to these monies. Indeed, we heard also that Cocoa Board had at some point agreed to give to the cocoa farmer at least 63% of the cocoa that they were exporting. We know about smuggling of cocoa from Ghana, for example. We do know that most of our farmlands have been lost to Galamsey. Above all, we also know that the reason why Galamsey has actually become such a protected partisan sort of thing is also because of the campaigning in 2012, for example, in 2016, for example. And you see, sometimes I feel that there is a need for a certain objectivity when we have these conversations. Like you clearly indicated, there was then candidate Akufo-Addo promising everybody in communities where these activities were actually rampant, that that party in particular, if elected into office, would largely be tolerant of whatever it is that they were doing. Then we had another candidate telling them that this was actually a challenge to do with what? Livelihoods, a need for people to survive. So why don't we regulate it further? Why don't we amend the laws? Why don't we allow for certain parts where you can't do this? Remediation in terms of planting trees, reclaiming some of these lands, water treatment, because remember that there's a whole logistical chain, that in treating the water bodies, you're also providing jobs. In reclaiming the land and the soil, you are also creating jobs. In allowing for chiefs to participate in the conversation, you are then decentralizing this conversation. But remember, there's a wider conversation about education on responsible mining, about the fact that as a party, the NDC actually legislated on most of the mining activities that we currently engage in. It's a historical fact.
But as I pointed out, why didn't you continue that same message in 2020? You took advantage of that too.
I just told you.
And then you have John Mahama also in 2020
the conversation
to say,
only changed.
I will
and
give
you know,
an amnesty.
every day we have this conversation, my heart goes out to the family of Major Mahama, who was literally one of the victims of this fight against Galamsey at the time. A young man, very promising guy with a promising future. I think that for me, I take the conversation about Galamsey personally because there was a young man that I knew very well. His young children have been left fatherless. And this is actually a symbol of what this fight against Galamsey represents, not just for me as a member of the NDC, but for John Mahama as candidate and former president.
And the party's, MPP's communications director will join us shortly, but keeping them honest, both parties, as I've just illustrated, have played politics with Galamsey when it suits both of you. Nanado did it in 2016. He won in the areas. John Mahama did it in 2020, and he served him in the areas. Isn't why we are failing to fight this? Because everybody now is looking at the political game.
I totally disagree with you. At least John Mahama is on record. It is well documented. The effort that was put into amending the Minerals and Mining Act in 2003.
True.
There is every effort to indicate that he actually set up an anti-Galamsey task force.
That's a fact.
Making very good inroads.
That's a fact.
The third thing is that John Mahama has always told us that mining has been with us a very long time. It is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Thank you.
But there's also a fact. In 2020, he said he will give amnesty to people who have been put in jail rightfully by the incumbent president, this president, who was fighting Galamsey at the time, who also amended the law, who also set up a task force.
These conversations must be situated in the proper context. What was it John Mahama was talking about? He was looking at it from a perspective of persons who genuinely required jobs that were not there. He was looking at it from the perspective of livelihoods, that a certain aspect of it could actually be legislated upon to ensure that we were doing this responsibly. But like I said, the buck stops with President Akufo-Addo, and I don't want us to make this an issue about an obligation or eminence on John Mahama, for example. He's currently not president of Ghana.
He may be in 2025.
But he will be.
He's a president in waiting.
He will be, and it is a reason why he has actually, if you know, made a very categorical statement about what an NDC in office will do to continue to mine responsibly, to encourage responsible mining. Remember that at the time, all the persons who were being arrested and thrown into jail were largely artisanal miners, our own persons. Whereas the persons who were actually foreigners and supporting government officials, as we now know from the Frimpong Boateng report, were literally engaging in these illegal mining activities. So what were we doing? We were nitpicking and picking up those who had no voices. At the time, within the context, the conversation was about why punish our own people as against the Chinese. And if you recall, this was the conversation that led to that persecution of Madame Aisha Wang. Even that one, look at the time it took. Look at the length of public outcry, the opprobrium that that whole discussion actually led to. Indeed, our Attorney General is known on record to have told us that everybody should ignore whatever Mr. Mahama was saying. Indeed, then President Akufo-Addo told us that he was putting what? His job on the line for Galamsey. In his own backyard in Chibi, where water bodies were being polluted, where it is actually alleged that Galamsey activities were taking place right outside his doorstep. How was the Frimpong Boateng report treated? This is a member of government, a member of cabinet, a minister at the time, as chairperson of the interministerial committee. This is not the NDC. This is not John Mahama's cabinet. This is not you or I in that cabinet. So let's ask a question. Why then will President Akufo-Addo say that he is putting his life on the line? Why will Ghana Water Company come up with this issue that they are struggling even to find what? Potable water to pump into the system because of these illegal activities? Why then will Frimpong Boateng be vilified, even sued by his own colleagues who were members of this interministerial committee, and then to do the unthinkable, to publicly pretend to destroy excavators that did not necessarily belong to those miners who were Ghanaian.
But that's the same approach John Mahama took in 2013. He also destroyed excavators, seized them and burned them.
How many excavators did you see John Mahama burning?
Well, under the task force that was set up and led by Inusa Fuseni, they also burned Galamsey sites and Galamsey equipment.
The scale of it now was never on this level. That's another aspect of the conversation you are missing.
That's the scale of the Galamsey? The
scale of the Galamsey activities, the scale of legal people participating behind these illegal activities, the scale of individuals like yourself and others in government, persons who are trustees of our environment are currently actively alleged to be key participants. We know about Ekwewusi, for example. We heard about Lord Comey and others. And these are members of government accusing one another. You heard the Honorable Apon Nkrumah, a colleague of yours, on this matter. We have heard from Dr. Frimpong Boateng, sorry, Professor Frimpong Boateng. Why would we be pretending that we do not know what is going on? You see, look, let me state, John Mahama is a man who walks his talk. John Mahama is one of the leaders who has done the most to fight against Galamsey, to ensure that alternative measures are put in place to support persons engaged in Galamsey. He's also honest enough to believe that you might not be able to completely remove it, you understand? But you can encourage people to do it, what? Responsibly.
Yeah, let's go to the messaging
then. These things happen.
What is the core proposal this year from the John Mahama campaign to dealing with this problem? I mean, arguably, it's one of the biggest environmental crises we have currently. Whoever wins next year will have to tackle this head on. What are his core themes in terms of dealing with it? What is his core message?
I'm sure that most of these things would normally start with a conversation around what is legal. So from the perspective of regulation, I'm sure that the document that he left, which was the mining improvement policy document, which is what actually should have served as a guide for all of us going into the future, is still a document that all of us can revisit. Secondly, he intends to be sure that he will create opportunities for everybody, not just a few. And if we are able to stem corruption, Evans, I'm sure that most of these gentlemen will be able to find something worthwhile. Thirdly, we are even encouraging participation.
Just bullet for me, the first two will be one?
Certainly regulation.
Okay, regulating to what? To regularize it, to ban it?
Regulating first and foremost to give other categories. So we'll now have the SSM, which is a small-scale mining license. We will have the medium-scale license. Then we'll have the large-scale mining license.
But we already have the small-scale miners license.
But you know that it is also not, it has never been clearly regulated. And
but it's regulated already. There are regulations that the Minerals Commission gives to small-scale miners who operate.
But in the past, what was Minerals Commission doing? They'll give you a license to go out there and do whatever reconnaissance. The truth is that we don't monitor these things. Don't forget that Galamsey started because a lot of these mining pits were left by other large mines.
So your law is to improve monitoring?
Improve monitoring, improve supervision, create other avenues, because there's a conversation also around climate, around pollution of our water bodies. It is a larger logistical problem beyond just the fact that people need to survive. Note, there are also diseases because of the chemicals that are being used in these mining areas. Secondly, there's all sorts of lung diseases that are coming up. People are getting all manner of infections. The third thing is that this is also about what? Survival. If we don't have a leadership that is responsible, a leadership that agrees that something needs to be done beyond just turning a blind eye. But remember, the biggest thing is that persons within his administration will certainly not. And we were here with Inusa Fuseni. Did you ever hear even a rumor that we had persons in cabinet who were engaged in these activities? So
a crackdown within his administration of people who were...
with the leader.
Because I heard him say that he will sack any member of the administration.
Nobody would even dare, because you see, that's the main difference between the NDC and the MPP. There are just some activities that members of the NDC do not engage in.
But you mentioned the MPP, but nothing is improving so far, is it not? I mean,
how would allegations... It will never improve, because you see...
That has been improving. Hasn't been improving.
You see, that's the whole point. We have a clearing agent as president who refuses to even admit for the first part that Frimpong Boateng's report is something he ought to work on. They came out with all these denials, and that's what they do. There is a certain protectionism that we see from President Akufo-Addo that we don't have from John Mahama. And there's a certain level of collusion by government appointees and trustees, for example. Above all, Mr. Mahama has said that chiefs will be a key pivotal persons in this.
What would he do with them?
He would find a way to invite them into the conversation. Don't forget that most of these activities take place in their backyards anyway. Once we offer them a certain percentage, a better approach to negotiations, something that they would use even.
So you're giving them concessions?
Concessions, or give them even a percentage, for example.
Of
mining rights. No, we can increase it.
Already get
it used to be,
royalties,
it was about
right?
5%.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
So there will be a conversation around increasing
the royalties for them, for mining.
So that they can get something more that they would invest in.
That will go directly to the chiefs,
directly
the traditional
to the chiefs,
authorities.
exactly. Because the traditional authorities do a great job. Look, the reason why we even have some water bodies that we can still boast of is largely because of the contribution of the water bodies. Mr. Mahama has also said something, that the basic aspects of the local governance system, for example, in the past, under the NDC administration, for example, local governance was actually being decentralized, where assemblies had better control over some of these activities. But even the bigger conversation is also about lack of what? Access to jobs. And then remember, he made a huge promise, and I remember people thought it was a joke, that artificial intelligence could also be used to counter some of these activities.
How? I've heard him say that, but I'm going to hear the explanation as to how you're going to do it.
Artificial intelligence is used also to fight what? We use it to fight corruption. We use it to fight crimes.
Yeah, but how would you use artificial intelligence to fight
detect areas where these activities are most rife? It would also be able to quickly...
Well, we know that already. We don't need artificial intelligence to tell us.
But now you can find easier ways, quicker ways in real time. That's what technology does for you, to help you improve matter. Look, you can sit in your room even and be able to tell that the military that you've sent, instead of the ones that we saw in videos who were now wearing mufti and going out there to engage in these activities themselves, these are technologies that will be used to actually expose some of these activities.
And how are you going to fund that? Because artificial intelligence in this sector is going to cost you quite a bit.
It would even be done for free, because remember that climate control, climate change, environment...
For free?
A big conversation, yes.
How?
Government to government, state to state, these are conversations that are taking place. There's a lot of resources.
So you haven't thought about the budget for this? You're hoping that you get it for free?
By all means, there will be conversations that will lead us to this process. But note also that it's a matter of public interest. Larger mining corporations invest a lot in their mines. The activities of these illegal and irresponsible miners affect their activities too. It is also their responsibility in terms of corporate image to invest in these activities. And they are doing a great job already. So
you're going to get partly funding from the established large-scale mines?
From large-scale mines, from governments, from various bodies. CSOs, for example, are having a huge conversation about the environment.
Why would CSOs put money behind artificial intelligence?
They would help us with education. They will help us with training.
But we're talking about the artificial intelligence bit.
Absolutely. And everybody's interested in this conversation. You know, there is something that modern technology does for us. It makes things much easier. It presents a better photograph or picture. It gives you better images. It actually satisfies something that humans cannot do.
Well, once upon a time, this government deployed drones. They bought drones to fight this. It did not quite help because you're fighting an activity that happens deep in the forest.
The drones will not work.
Yeah, but I put it to you that artificial intelligence deep in the forest will not work either.
We are looking to investigate. We are looking for information. We are looking for a better way to address these things even before they happen. We want information ahead even of the activity. So, for example, you develop, because he has actually said in his speech at the University of Mines and Energy, for example, that at least $500 million will be deployed, first into research, to get data, and of course, using modern technology to support a very wide policy about how to...
$500 million. So his comprehensive fight against illegal mining will cost $500 million?
That is what will be the cost to the state. But of course, there will be other resources available. Like I said, this is a matter of great public interest.
Okay. Stay with me.
Education is important.
Stay with me, because I've just been joined. He was on Zoom. We lost him, but he's back now on phone. That is the Director of Communications for the NPP, Richard Ehiagba. Richard, thanks for your time. And thanks for joining us, although we lost you very briefly. But I want to track back to where I started with Ba Mukhtari, because going back to 2016, the incumbent president, then he was an opposition leader, played politics with this. At the time in 2013, when John Mahama was fighting illegal mining, he was promising to regularize the actions of illegal miners across the country. And he got a political reward for it in the 2016 elections. Then come to 2020, he then reverses the role. He then becomes the fighter-in-chief against illegal miners and lost quite heavily in the Galamsey areas. We've already tracked that and showed the evidence of this, while John Mahama too was promising amnesty for those who have been arrested and detained and prosecuted for engaging in illegal mining. Would you admit that yourselves have played politics with this subject, the reason why we failed at fighting it?
Well, thank you very much, Evans. I think you've teed the conversation up quite well. But before I address your question, and good evening to my sister Joyce and your viewers, I just want to make the remark that, increasing the end is sounding unbelievable. People cannot believe the end. Simply listen to my. You just have to. You cannot attain from what she says that there is a commitment given the things say. 500 million to deploy artificial intelligence. What kind of artificial intelligence are you going to
Well, to clarify, she didn't say 500 million for artificial intelligence.
You are putting a price.
Richard, it's important. No, just a second. He said 500 million for the entire fight, the state's contribution to the comprehensive approach, including artificial intelligence, so called 500 million.
That's okay. But I'm saying that you are putting a price to something before you know what you are going to do. Who plans like that? They don't know specifically what they are going to do, but somehow they know how much they're going to spend. This is ridiculous. This is something that they are just talking because they have.
But Richard, isn't it rather prudent planning? Isn't it rather prudent planning to budget for something?
Sorry?
I mean, isn't it rather prudent planning to, when you have a plan, budget for it?
Yeah, you have a plan, you budget for it, but what are you budgeting for? You don't budget in a vacuum. You budget for things. So what are they budgeting for? The specific thing they're going to do, they don't know. She hasn't told us. So that just tells you that it's a hoodwink. It's a calculated sweet talk to dribble Ghanaians into believing that they've had something to offer. In actual fact, zero. They don't have anything to offer. The question you have raised, the whole business of fighting illegal mining, Galamsey, which is devastating our communities and our land and our environment, is a real conversation that we must have. Actually, which got out of hand because the NDC failed to be serious about it. They failed to be serious about it. Now, it reached a portion where it was getting completely out of hand. Then drastic measures now, desperate measures, had to be put in place to address it. So the point you must understand is that where we are, the difficulties that have characterized our efforts to deal with Galamsey is a direct function of NDC's irresponsibility.
I mean, how is that, Richard? Just a second on that.
Let me go to the second point.
I'll allow you to go to the second point, but I'm curious. You've had 7 years. If you add this year to it, 8 years to fight this. Can you say that it's still the NDC's failings on the matter that crippled your ability to deal with the matter?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we got to the point we got to where you needed desperate measures to actually put a lid on it before you deal with the substantial matters, because the NDC failed to do the fundamentals.
But remember that in 2013,
if you just allow me to flow, you can ask your question afterwards. My sister told you that the former President, John Dramani Mahama, His Excellency, admitted that mining has been with us for decades. And I agree with that. And I've heard people way back in my father's time, ages, because my father was a police officer, so he worked in these areas, where mining has been there. Small-scale mining, artisanal mining has been there.
But Rachel, I need to point this out to you. You made a point earlier. You remember that in 2013, when John Mahama set up his task force, amended the law to make it tougher, in the lead up to the 2016 elections, you had Nanado, who was campaigning on it, promising to regularize Galamsey, etc. at the time, and he got a benefit from that. So how do you accuse the NDC of being the party that failed to do this in the time, in the period when we were fighting?
I'm talking about fundamental responsibility that was not taken by the NDC, and therefore caused the issue to get out of hand. And at the point it got out of hand, you needed desperate measures to deal with it. Now, everything that you're alluding to, and I think you want me to get there, we'll have that conversation. President Akufo-Addo's offer is to recognize, like all of us, to say that Galamsey or small-scale mining has been with us. Because after all, the resource that is down is given all to exploit our benefit. Now, the only missing link there is the government that used to regulate and so can mine responsibly, not ways that not devastate the environment. That was the conversation and that vision for another level. And that's what we have pursuing this far. But you see, the point I was making is important because you have allowed, and the end is allowed the issue to get out of hand. So the efforts that are being put in place to address it, okay, fundamentally are dealing with if you like, the symptoms of it, to be able to contain it before you can do the substantial matters of regulating it. But even that, we have done so well with it. You recall, Evans, in 2017 when we came in, there was a total, complete ban on illegal mining. This was the point where the president indicated candidly to Ghanaians that as far as he's concerned, fighting and ensuring that our environment is protected is fundamental, even in relation to his own presidency. In other words, he was willing to stick his presidency to ensure that we deal with this matter sustainably. By the time he was engaging this subject, it was out of control. So the ban was to deal with the extent to which the issue has gone out of control, to try to stem it down. And so whilst the ban was in place, the president, through his ministers, the formation of the Interministerial Committee, to try to find ways, not only to fight it, but to find ways to sustainably regularize it so that it is not done.
Yeah, but Richard, that fight has failed, is it not? I mean, just look at the turbidity of the waters now. The Ghana Water Company tells us that it's worse now than it's ever been in our history. That tells you that you failed at this fight. Two things. You failed or not entirely successful to address that situation because somebody who was supposed to deal with the issue at its budding level failed to do that. So you have come in at the point where the issue is out of control and you are trying to contain it. So the challenges to deal with an issue at a point where it's out of control versus when it is budding are two different challenges. And that's why it's fundamental in having this conversation to point to the fact that where it was easy to deal with this thing, the NDC failed. And so now it has become a problem blown out of proportion that in dealing with it, you need a lot Richard,
more
so is it NDC?
You need a lot more consensus.
So is it NDC's fault? But Richard, so is it NDC's fault that you failed? A party that has been out of power for almost 8 years.
I haven't said that. You know that government run in a continuum. But the problem at the beginning stages, your application of solution to them are different, and they are actually easy to deal with. But then when you get to a point where the thing is out of control, your remedial policy and whatever measures that you want to put in place, military efforts, those are a bit more high level and a bit more chaotic to deal with. That is the issue. So if you ask me, I would tell you that the effort put in by this government has not entirely failed. In fact, it has contained the situation and has given us some of the successes that we have achieved that we can talk about today, really.
Successes such as?
The mining sector. If you go into small-scale mining sector, the Ministry for Lands and Natural Resources, working closely with the Mineral Commission and allied agencies, have managed to now regularize small-scale mining through the community mining schemes, which is allowing Ghanaians to leverage the resource that's given us. Well,
on that point, you speak to civil society, and they say that community mining has now become a cover for small-scale illegal miners who actually take over the lands of communities.
Well, so I think that they should bring us the evidence. But as far as I know, okay, I'm not in a position to disprove or say anything contrary to what they have said. But what I know is that that effort is being streamlined to be the alternative, because really what you cannot do, given the failure of the NDC to regulate this from its infancy, you cannot say that you will not allow any mining at all in Ghana, small scale or large scale.
Richard,
so
once I have you...
what to do now is to streamline it. But in addition to that, you have to find avenues, alternative avenues for those hitherto were engaged in illegal mining.
Let me ask you, Richard, you have
a
campaign to prosecute now this year. What is the core message? What is your policy proposal for dealing with this threat differently in 2025?
You know, in 2021, the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources, immediately when he assumed office, convened a national consultative meeting with stakeholders in a small-scale mining sector. Following that, they have ensured that, one, the small-scale mining issue that I've told you is what they've been pursuing, that now properly streamlined, and they have issued directive banning all prospecting in forest areas that are protected. That measure. Now, going in 2025, I think that has some information. Once people will see the clear picture, what they should, but there's not to be any drastic change except that maybe some fine-tuning. But currently, if you recall, His Excellency Nana Danko Akufo-Addo's engagement with our chiefs, what he told them in clear, and I agree input, is that we cannot fight this Galamsey without the full and honest participation of our chiefs. And so, therefore, it's brought the issue to where it must be addressed.
Yeah, and so how do you propose, how is the MPP proposing to get the chiefs on board? The NDC is very clear that they will increase the royalties that you pay out to the communities and the chiefs will benefit that. That's very clear. What is the MPP's proposal?
Well, without telling you specifics, as I indicated to you, our manifesto is being formed, but what I can tell you is that we'll do perhaps even more. If you look at the commitment of the two governments, you can see between the two.
But Richard, we have 5 months to an election. NDC is also drafting a manifesto, but they have clear messages on what they want to do. They've actually even costed it. You raised it at the beginning. I'm asking you, at this point to go, it's the biggest environmental threat you're facing. You can't bullet for me what your key interventions will be in 2025 on this matter?
Evans, I can tell you that everything my sister Joyce has told you.
No, I mean, I'm asking about your message.
I will get to that. Evans,
no, but you've not, because of time, you've already addressed her at the beginning.
Well, I'm telling you that everything she said is conjecture, so you cannot categorize that as specific strategy. And,
whether it is or not, that's what she said. But I'm asking you about what's your core message to deal with this matter? A bulletin for me, if you may.
It's not. It's just conjecture, things she's coming up with to tell you. But I am telling you that I'm not in a position to tell you those things now, perhaps, preempt what our manifesto positions will be. But I can tell you what we are doing now, what we have done to stem the tide from when the NDC has been reckless and allowed this thing to have to be blown out of proportion. We have managed it. We have contained it. If we haven't been very drastic, if Nana Danko Akufo-Addo has not been very clear in his commitment to deal with this matter today, you won't have the situation we have now, as bad as it is. You would have a worse situation. So we have done everything that we need to be able to contain the situation. And going forward, His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, once our manifesto comes out, there are clear propositions that will come from there to make sure that we deal with the matter sustainably. And I was telling you, Evans, about what it is that we're doing. If you see long-term, one thing that will feature in our manifesto would be what we are doing with the alternative livelihood employment program to ensure that we are recouping or we are actually finding a pathway for people who depended on Galamsey for livelihood.
Okay.
With this measure, we can say that we will then be able to pull more people away from Galamsey and give them alternative livelihood. And not only that, Evans, the alternative program that I just talked to you about is also invested in reforestation and reclaiming of the damaged lands and dealing with how to get the environment back to where it ought to be.
Okay, I want to quickly...
These are the measures that we're going to
propose. I want to quickly
yes.
I want to quickly come to the studio and give both of you 2 minutes each to get me some reactions on this. And then I'll bring in Dara Bosu very briefly just to give me the independent view of what the party should be focusing on in terms of interventions this year on this big subject of Galamsey. So you've heard his points about, first of all, what he planned to do, but also his own take on the politics of this as it relates to whether the fight has been successful or not. Quick reaction.
Well, Evans, I'm sure that when you listen to the very incoherent points being raised by my brother Richard, you can tell that he's totally not prepared. You can also tell that government completely irresponsible, that the very recklessness with which they handle everything is exactly what he's actually displaying on this program. I have no doubt in my mind that John Mahama and the NDC have categorically worked very hard with the good people of Ghana to ensure that we find a lasting solution to the challenge of Galamsey. Mr. Mahama is one of the most credible and trusted leaders that we have. He has pledged that first and foremost we will work in conjunction with the national team that will be established with the Forestry Commission to monitor these Galamsey sites. I've told you that when you use artificial intelligence, you can monitor, you can map out, and you can clearly even delineate areas that are probably very close, predictably, to water bodies, etc. That this is a technology that he intends to deploy and deploy effectively. The next thing I've spoken about is also to indicate that whereas we have a government that refuses to take responsibility, that refuses to be accountable, if Mr. Ayagwa speaks to all the things that he's talking about, why? $58 million was used and expended on National Cathedral. It is just sand. I'm sure today you've seen a very interesting debate about a building in the US of a new medical facility for $50 million. And they use an example of a country, Ghana, where we've expended $58 million on building absolutely nothing. This is the government that is talking to us. Evans, sometimes I think that we should not even allow government spokespersons to dictate to us or try to tell us what they expect after 8 years in office. We do not take moral lessons from the MPP. I have indicated clearly that first and foremost, Mr. Mahama set the tone when he amended the Minerals and Mining Act. He spoke on a platform in the university where students are taught what to do to protect and preserve the environment, a university built by the National Democratic Congress. Indeed, what he has been telling us over the months is that his commitment to fighting Galamsey is real.
Let me ask you then quickly, I mean, in 2020 when he was saying you give amnesty, is it a position he still holds today?
If there are many of our brothers and sisters languishing in prisons because of illegal mining, certainly this is a matter that we must look at within the context of the Frimpong Boateng report, within the context of the corruption that has engulfed Akufo-Addo and his government, within the context of the allegations which Mr. Mahama has pledged to investigate and prosecute where possible as against the poor Ghanaian citizens.
So what would the basis for the amnesty? So this is a position he hasn't moved away from?
Of course, so far it hasn't even come up. But it's the conversation that we had in the 2020 election.
Yeah. So I'm asking whether in 2024...
Personally, I think that if people are being banded together and thrown into prison without necessarily going before the law, where we are waiting trials 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, when the allegations are that large persons within government themselves are engaged in Galamsey. We saw the late Sir John's will, for example. Is this me coming to talk about it from the NDC? No. So look, Mr. Mahama has demonstrated over the years his commitment to finding a lasting solution. Secondly, this is also a survival issue. And so the best people will be stakeholders in those communities who will be joining us in this conversation. And note that all these joint actions have largely been maybe joint military action, joint police, this, joint citizens, that it has never actually worked in tandem with stakeholders in these communities. But presently, a lot of our chiefs and queen mothers, various opinion leaders are very worried about this canker. Let me not say that the trustee of Ghana's constitution, the president himself, is actually largely responsible for these illegal activities because persons perceived as his appointees are engaging in these activities. Did you hear our candidate on the other side, Dr. Bawumia, saying that they will no longer burn excavators? They will no longer see people's equipment that they use.
Said that.
Exactly.
But that's a change in policy.
So we know who has no commitment, who has not demonstrated any commitment,
let me quickly bring
or who refuses to take responsibility. And that is certainly not the NDC.
Let me quickly bring in Richard, quick 2 minutes on this subject of Bawumia has changed the tone. He says he's not going to be burning excavators anymore. That is actually testament, is it not, that the man who has taken over from the current president doesn't believe that that approach was effective.
Evan, my sister talks about former president giving speeches in university campuses. Now we know that those speeches has been given a controlled environment where dissent is not allowed. Recently, when he did the same in Ashanti region here, one of the young people who were there dead then, and he completely back to speaking for. And so the environment is talking about it so that whatever you say, nobody can tell it. No, they haven't sent you. So he just stopped them taking the walk. But it's not able to sound coherent. How can the president you are speaking for says that he's going to be tough on Galamsey, then tells you that the very people who have committed offenses doing illegal mining, he's going to let them walk? Complete incoherence. Complete incoherence. So I'm saying that if we are looking for a fight to beat Galamsey, you have to be realistic about it. You have to be sustainable in your policy proposition. So one, we're saying that, yes, people have been doing Galamsey. We have to fight it. We came in with very desperate measures to try and stem it, which is a direct outcome of the NDC's irresponsibility in government. We will deal with it. So we tried and we implemented measures to stop it. We've calmed it. You cannot tell me that Galamsey is at the same height as it was when we came in 2017. We have contained it. Now we have put in place policy initiatives that will take effect over time to bring back the environment that has been degraded through the NALET initiative. And not only that, we are investing in the people who are using Galamsey as their livelihood to find alternative employment means. That tells you that sustainably you are going to weed out this because people find it now. Last time I was on your platform, I said that, look, Galamsey is an intractable problem because it's lucrative. People find it as a means of livelihood, and it is. But what you want as a government is not to completely ban it, but to find constructive, sustainable avenue that aligns with our environmental protection objectives. So we want to reform it, which reform is happening with a small-scale mining approach that is working, and we are regularizing it in those terms. What we need is to ensure enforcement and the participation.
Yeah, Richard, well, thank you very much. Just ran out of time on this one. I just want to give a quick word to Darrell Books, who is the Deputy National Director at Arocha, Ghana. And very quickly, and apologies there, as you see, I wanted to lay out and get the party's thoughts on this and hear the messaging going forward. I can bring you in. You've heard the parties already. What should they be focusing on this subject? What's the Arocha proposal for this year?
Yes, thank you, Evans and MPP. I think it's quite interesting. I want us to take it from the angle of where we are now, and I think that where we are now is not a good situation. Our position now as a country is not good when it comes to mining, and things drastically must change. And what we propose, I think I've heard a few of the proposals coming from the NDC side, but not really anything concrete. I mean, listening to the MPP representative. But I think what we need to see is that we realize that there has so far been a lot of a gap in terms of accountability on the part of within the mining sector. When you look at the oil and gas sector, there's something like the PIAC. And I think that the minerals and mining sector could also benefit significantly from such a system where we can get some sort of accountability on the part of all the state agencies that are responsible for monitoring and regulating the minerals sector. Until that is done, we are really going to miss out on making sure that the state agencies that are responsible, because for now, I mean, we hear and talk about the fact that the Minerals Commission has got challenges, the police has got challenges, but who is really making sure that these things are...
So one, for civil society, you want a PIAC-like agency to regulate the sector. What else would you propose? Hello, Darryl? Oh, unfortunately.
Yes, I think one other thing that we think is very, very critical. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes. One other thing that's critical?
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yes. One other thing that's also critical is the fact that we have actually ignored and watched as our water bodies have been polluted, our forest reserves have been destroyed. We need to really start taking action to secure all of these critical habitats. Otherwise, as has been said already, our water is at risk, our health is at risk, and even our food system is at risk. We've seen how our cocoa has been affected, and I think that there needs to be a clear policy that sets boundaries for our mining regime in this country. Until we do that, we are going to continue to have this kind of impunity as we see. We've seen some also attempt by even leadership to now auction off certain forest reserves. These are all critical ecosystems in this country.
So I hear you proposing, I hear you saying that for the parties, both of them must commit to explicitly banning any form of mining in forest reserve. This is something that has been coming up quite repetitively. That's what you're proposing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that is one of the key proposals you're making. Again, I think we should also now try to implement a free, prior, and informed consent policy, and also with a backed by a legal framework that ensures that before mining happens in any community, we have clearance from the community members themselves. I mean, we have seen how on the back of community mining, government has rolled out several mining activities in several areas without consent from the people. And some of them had to really stand up against the forces of the state. Sometimes with the government actually moving the police and the military there to quell the dissent and all of that.
And that's another point that has been made, and it's great indeed. That's getting the community's consent in any form of mining license that is given, where either small scale or large scale. But Darryl, thank you very much. We need to spend a bit more time on the subject. Once the manifestos are out, we get to interrogate it a bit more. At least you've gotten a sense of where the two parties stand on the all-important subject of illegal mining. Mukhtari, Joyce, thank you very much for joining us. Grateful that you could join me. Richard also for joining us, and Darryl with Arocha Ghana. Enjoy the rest of the evening.